living in it now. We're breathing in it in Los Angeles. Folks, our institutions are collapsing, but much of this is not new. If you're as old as I am, you remember 65, you remember 92, you remember 2009. We have survived economic, health crises, social crises before. And we've come through. We've come through wars. We've come through the civil rights struggle. We've come through depressions. So crises are not new, but the chaos that we're experiencing is the new stuff. This is the stuff of the surreal, this alternative reality that we're living in. Hoarding toilet paper. You guys remember that insanity, right? The vitriol around mask wearing, the case of the missing mailboxes, sacrificing elders to the gods of the stock market, conspiracy theories, cannibal eating pedophiles. I just don't get it. The debunking of facts, the criminalizing of science and scientists, the unhooded white supremacy, neo-Nazism, neo-Confederacy, anti-urbanism, anti-education, anti-women, anti-immigrant, anti-government, you figure it out, put in the missing blank. Alas, we are facing the death of civility. We're killing the age of enlightenment. So the question is, right, what does that leave us? Where does that leave us? As an industry of professional planners, engineers, architects, developers, builders, each of us in some way is working on green buildings, sustainability, climate change. How do any of these crises and this chaos, how does that matter to us in this moment? When racial, social, and economic justice are at the epicenter of our current social, political, and economic environment. When issues of systemic racism and the call for structural change has taken center stage. Do any of these pesky justice issues have anything to do with us? Well, obviously the answer is yes. I hope the answer is obvious. On one level, the building industry has now and has always played a central role in putting people back to work, rebuilding our economy from economic disasters, from the COVID-19 economic recovery, scaffolding the middle class through middle wage jobs and business opportunities, and building urban infrastructure, rails, roads, water and sewer systems, energy infrastructure, housing, commercial centers. So here we are again. We are called to action, folks. We need to rebuild America again. We need, and we are up to the task, at least at some level of it. We're all working to build back better, to build and make it greener, more resilient, more sustainable, to address the threat of climate change and the extreme weather are driving this imperative. It is baked into our California building codes, our policies, the investments, the technologies that we're advancing. We, California, Los Angeles, we are becoming the epicenter of what a Green New Deal might look like. But this is not a question of how do we bounce back, but it's a question, how do we bounce forward? It's not just a question of how we build buildings, but it also has to do with how we rebuild our industry, how we rebuild our institutions, our economy, our businesses, our cities and communities to be equitable, to be more just, to be more inclusive. The answer to that requires really deep introspection to unpack the structural and systemic racism built into the building sector, even the green building sector. And it requires new solutions to a justice-centered green economy in a post-COVID era. The movement for Black Lives sort of gives us a hint, tells us the kind of work that we need to do. This Black-led multiracial movement has called attention to structural racism in America, in America's institutions, and has struck a nerve with everyone. There's a new awakening of the post-racial generation. I think about this in the context of my youngest son, who's a millennial. And you know, I'm outside, I'm watching all of these young non-Black folks marching around Black Lives Matter. And I'm just like curious about, well, what is going on here? And I recognized and I realized that my son grew up and he would always tell me that his peers don't see color, they don't see race. They accepted a level of diversity that in my race conscious world, you know, growing up in the 60s and 70s, where we were still fighting for an ability to sit at the lunch counter, where race mattered and we were race conscious, we were fortunate enough to raise our children in a colorblind world, even though I kept telling them, the world is not colorblind, son. But his generation that sort of recognized through the unfortunate murder of George Floyd, that this is not a colorblind world. So it's a reawakening and a call of attention to the structural racism in America's institution. It's struck a nerve with everyone. So the movement is in some ways about police reform, but is more than that. The movement for Black Lives is an intersectional movement. They are making that very clear. The fight for criminal justice is also a fight for health equity, pay equity, environmental justice. There's a recognition that everything is related, that Black and brown people are disproportionately affected and dying from COVID due to pre-existing underlying health problems that they have been inherited from living in toxic communities and toxic homes, from poverty wage jobs, the lack of career pathways, environmental and viable educational opportunities. So we need to take this moment to dig deep about how we are contributing to the structural racism and the systemic barriers in the building sector that needs to be dismantled. The fact is, our efforts to green our buildings run the risk of perpetuating and reproducing social and economic inequities and injustices if we don't pay attention to where we are going. So the first piece of work is really owning our complicity in structural racism. I think you all know this through schools, if no other experiences, that our industry has perpetuated the problems and codified it in policies and regulations, exclusionary zoning, segregated land uses, urban destruction, or some people might call it urban renewal, restrictive covenants, freeway construction that destroyed viable communities. Where I live in West Adams, right off the 10 freeway, used to be a very viable community. It's come back now, it's gentrified, but really destroyed what was once a very viable Black community. Redlining, which made it difficult for Black and brown communities to start businesses, to grow businesses, to buy homes, to build wealth. Discrimination in the construction industry, jobs as well as contracting opportunities. And now we're seeing our contribution to gentrification. I have, these are the facts, the facts, and I can just share a few examples where this has been a lived, and I have to say, a painful experience for me as a professional urban planner. And I remember my first experience with racism in our industry was when I was a young student at Fisk University in Nashville, Tennessee. It's a historically Black college and university. I think everybody knows about HBCUs now because of Kamala Harris's vice presidency and had going to Howard. But anyway, I was a senior at the college, and I guess I'll tell my age. I was 72, it was 1972. And I was a urban planning intern in the Davidson County Planning Department. And I guess I must have been pretty scary because, I really had a huge afro and, what we did in 1972. And I would go to work as an intern 2 or 3 times a week, spend a couple of hours. I was doing environmental trend analysis of air pollutants in Davidson County. But I had a supervisor who would harass me just about every day that I would come in. And I would get to the point where I refused to talk to him. And I remember 2 particular instances where he would just sit next to me and come close to me in my face. And the first time I remember him asking me, what kind of planner do you plan to be? Do you plan to be an Angela Davis planner. That's because I had a huge afro and I didn't say anything. I left that one alone. Another day I went into work, came up to me, sat next to me, and he asked me the question. He says, it's a Black community outside of our window. He says, what would you do to rebuild that community? What would you do to that community? And again, I just refused to answer. I don't know if you've ever been arrested, but you know, when you get thrown in the back of a cop car, and I've been there in handcuffs, the cops always ask you all kinds of questions. You just don't say anything. You just, that's the last, you know, lawyers say, don't say anything. So with this guy, I didn't say anything. He answered for me. He said, I'll tell you what I'd do. I'd take a bulldozer and I'd knock down every one of those houses. This is our profession. This was my introduction as a young planning student. And it didn't stop there. Every phase of my professional development, I was confronted with these kinds of, that kind of racism. You know, I went to grad school, University of Penn Planning School, and found it there. We were seeing 72, 74, the beginning of the gentrification of West Philadelphia. And we were the sort of second generation African-American students in the master's program there. And it's a cultural clash. They didn't understand us, we didn't understand them, but that's a whole nother story. But one of the things we would do in our, you know, in our laboratories and our planning reports is that how to ensure, we were seeing the last vestiges of Black folks, you know, refusing to move under eminent domain. And they were, you know, stalwart in their effort to stay within their communities. But, you know, visit West Philly today and what do you see? It is called University Village. I don't know, something like that. The university has just taken over the entire West Philadelphia. And it continues. It's in every element of our work. My years at LA LISC, you know, I was putting money in the hands of community organizations in South LA building affordable housing. And I remember one of the very first loans, I put a $50,000 pre-development loan out to a group in South LA. And the underwriting committee asked me, why are we giving these people this money? Do they even split verbs? So now how do splitting verbs have anything to do with building affordable housing in our communities through community development delivery system? Today, this same organization is the largest, most effective land developer and landowner in South Los Angeles that's undergoing gentrification. These are the things that we've inherited. These are my lived experiences, and you know, we see it again and again. This is how we built America. These are the systemic barriers and racisms that we've inherited, and we're still living the consequences of these policies. So the question is, in a post-COVID economic recovery agenda, how do we fix 100 years of structural racism in the architecture, construction, and engineering industry that has produced income and wealth disparities, environmental injustices, and climate injustice? How do we reimagine? How do we re-engineer? And how do we rebuild our communities and our policies? Well, in some ways, this is the work of Emerald Cities, right? We were created really the last time we had a crisis in 2009 with this notion that we could rebuild better, that, and I don't really mean to use the Democratic, you know, theme, but it's a nice little way of putting words together. How do we build in a way that's a greener, how do we build a green economy in a way that helps all of us out of this economic crisis? So we brought together a multi-stakeholder coalition, labor unions, business and financial institutions, housing, community development organizations, workforce, youth groups, advocacy organizations. The whole idea then is that, you know, we were losing 10,000 jobs a day at that time. And we figured that if we're going to come out of this mess, that we really do have to work together and to find, you know, common ground, right? And create a shared vision. And so we we created this notion of basically, as we understand it, some of you call it the triple bottom line, how we grow the pie as opposed to actually thinking that we've got to fight each other for a share, a piece of the pie. How do we green our cities, right? To ensure that public and private investments are going into making our communities greener and healthier and more resilient. And with those investments, how do we make sure that we're building, creating good jobs, union jobs, living wage jobs, and creating business opportunities for and investment opportunities. And then with that investment and the building of that new economy, how do we strengthen our democracy and ensure equity? That people that have historically been left out of the mainstream economy are a part of this new economy. That's our vision, that was our goal. And these have been difficult conversations. You know, we're having to deal with issues of environmental racism, infrastructure needs of BIPOC communities, public health inequities, economic inequities. And these with stakeholders that have had, you know, 100 years of misinformation, miscommunication, mistreatment. Nobody understood you know, how labor was organized and what drives them, and or understood youth groups and the youth bills of the world, the conservation corps of the world, and what their challenges and needs were versus, you know, the NASCO partners, the energy service companies, and how they view the world and how they execute. We're having these conversations with each other in a way that I tell people reminds me of the Wild Wild West. My board members and our coalitions around the country, we sit together at these tables, and sometimes the conversations are not pretty. They're actually they're very truthful, you know, and honest and bold and apolitical. And those are the kinds of conversations we need to have. And the other thing I'm beginning to recognize is that I don't know why everybody keeps coming back to this table. It's like I'm giving away money or prizes, but the reality is people are coming back because they have been able to talk to folks outside of their silos, that they're hearing things and learning things and sharing things that they don't typically hear when they're just talking to their peers, their colleagues in, you know, in the labor unions or within the ESCO world or within the youth world. And there's a level of trust. There's a level of trust in one another in the building of these relationships. And when things get tough, and sometimes the conversations are tough. I remember one of our board members one day, she jumped up and she said, "I'm the only one that is a card-carrying Republican in this room." And our armchair Marxist says, "Yes, we know, but don't leave. We need you." So we have these moments. I have 3 stand-up comics, as I describe it, who actually know how to break, you know, the challenges when we face them. But we've got to face these challenges to figure out how we build a world that's that creates a win-win opportunities for everyone. And then that's not just about buildings, but it's about the environment, the economy, and our social well-being. So these are sort of the tools that I think are needed as we think about how we rebuild in Los Angeles and California and around the country in a post-COVID era, where we are experiencing not the crisis, but really the chaos, right? We've got to really be intentional about civic engagement. Many of you might know Dr. Manuel Pastor, right in our own backyard at USC. He tells me all the time, I do stuff and then he tells me what I'm doing in academic language. He says, "You're building epistemic communities." Oh, so I said, "Well, sounds good to me." So epistemic community is really about these multi-stakeholder collaboratives, and because the institutions that have built America, that has gotten us to where we are today, it does not work for where we need to go in the future. How do we change the rules of engagement? How do we change our business practices? How do we change policies with a new reality in front of us? And that new reality is climate change. That new reality is social and economic justice. How do we face that in a way? We cannot do it as professionals by ourselves in our offices. We got to be in the streets, and we have to have the conversations with the folks who who have different perspectives and find, again, that middle ground about how to move forward. So the other part of this is not just the democratic practice and establishing and rebuilding our democratic practices, but it's also building our economic infrastructure, or the economic inclusion that has been sort of the underpinning of all that's wrong in the way we operate today. Well, let me, the other thing before I get into this, the reason I want to mention about the importance of civic engagement is that I want to bring it up to where we are today and why it's important. There's sort of a new tsunami that I'm seeing in the work that I'm doing taking place in the green building sector. And it's around the issue of building electrification. I'm sure that you all are sort of engaged in some conversation, if not policy work around this. This is the new best idea. This is the new professional endeavor that's come about with good intentions to address, our climate clock. The driver, so the sort of next key driver to a zero net energy future. And it also is a good idea to address indoor air pollution, which the data begins to show that it is even greater than outdoor air pollution without regulatory limits and standards established to it. But once again, our profession is driving these policies without real engagement of affected communities in their formulation, and without fully understanding or addressing their consequences. What does it do to housing affordability? And you may know that, you might do some modeling around it or what have you, but how do you not bring folks to the conversation to find out how you balance that with public health issues and with other kinds of climate change issues? These are not, these are intersectional issues that require intersectional multi-stakeholder engagement to find the balanced solution. How do you address, building electrification, address issues of retro evictions or retro gentrification? It's a new language that we heard when we're working with community groups up in Northern California, which is, we're telling building owners now that you've got to fix up your building, and where's that cost being passed on to, and how is it getting passed on to communities where low-income communities where they cannot afford to stay in the unit anymore, into the neighborhood anymore? How are we addressing that kind of challenge? What are the impacts on households' energy budget? And are they more energy burdened if we are full electrical infrastructure? What does it do to affect household cultural practices where people use, gas stoves, good or bad or indifferent, as a part of families, where families come together and remember the rituals of Christmas and Thanksgiving and other practices? How does this affect workers, and what do we do about these negative externalities? We know the positive elements of building electrification, but how do we address the negative externalities and with complementary policies to ensure that communities, that we have more winners than we do have losers? You can't do this kind of policy development without the full engagement of all the communities that will be affected. We're doing this work around the country. We're doing it, just had our working with the Department of Energy and Environment in San Francisco, and we reached out on their behalf for their climate action policy and plan around building electrification policy. We had 250 organizations and individuals engaged in that turned out to be about a 9-month process to vet all of these issues, with specialized focus groups around workforce and labor issues and issues around affordable housing and environmental and climate justice. And part of it was educating our communities around what this building electrification is. There is, ground zero for many of our communities to even know what it is, much less to understand what the equity implications are of it. And to begin to understand what it is, own it, and then to find solutions across the multiple domains that we have to do. This is the work of rebuilding our communities and doing it in a way that's equitable. So we have to address all of these growing challenges, and part of it is also the growing inequalities and the wealth gap. in the green building sector. I worry, folks, that the greener we get, the greater the income inequalities and wealth gap, unless we address both the legacy and 21st century challenges of the building of the green economy. There are many reasons why we're challenged. The legacy challenges that we are facing is like our communities lack early career exposure to the jobs that you guys have. They don't have internships. They don't have mentoring opportunities. It's not baked into their curriculum in schools to know what it means to be an architect or to be an engineer or a developer or to be in the building and the construction world. They don't know what this is about. They don't understand what energy is. It's not in their curriculum. They don't understand about the infrastructure, water infrastructure challenges we have, or the relationship between the burning of fossil fuels and they're going to hospitals because of repeat cases of asthma. None of that is being baked into a pipeline of folks who can grow into an industry and to be true peers and players in this marketplace. There's a lack of career exposures. There's a lack of hiring in business networks that have come through the decades of discrimination and exclusion. There's really very complicated procurement methods and procurement procurement methods and project delivery methods, like 3P, public-private partnerships. We're developing these platforms, these construction platforms for typically large projects. And we're starting to see that there's going to be $2-3 trillion. Who knows what we'll get through Congress in 2021, 2022, but everyone's fairly committed to the fact that we've got to build out a new energy grid, a new water infrastructure, transportation, you name it. These are multi-billion, multi-year projects, and we're using project delivery methods that are probably appropriate to the task, but challenging for small minority women, veteran-owned contractors who've historically not built the track record, the experience of getting their bonding, the insurance, the qualifications, the hiring networks to be at those 3P tables. So this is part of structural racism. It's built in how we do business and what we need to do to change the capacity of to address these legacy. Was I muted? In addition to that, we have 21st century challenges. Besides the stuff of the past, we've got to deal with the fact that we're building these high performance buildings. They're, like I said, baked in our building codes. There are new technologies that are coming on the market every day, everything from what we do to do building estimating to, all of the system sensors that are going into, our heating systems and our electrical systems and smart buildings and smart cities. All of that has made the construction industry a whole new animal. Who's investing in our contractors to be a part of this new green reality? The materials are becoming more expensive. And so remember, if you've not had the capital, how do you play in this marketplace? So my friends, this is the work of economic inclusion. And I'm going to really end with just sharing with you a couple of things that we're doing in this space and really invite all of you to be a part of our work in the Los Angeles market. First thing we're trying to do is just build the pipeline. We're trying to we are exposing our young people in South and Southeast Los Angeles about the careers and opportunities that are in this space, about climate and how the whole ACES industry is really no longer just about jobs and income. It's a mission, that there's a mission for them to really be a part of a movement to create greener, more resilient communities that addresses, where our place in the ecosystem. So ACES is a program that we run. We're working with LA County in this regard, and through their Southern California Energy Efficiency Network, which is a network of energy efficiency municipalities, 120 jurisdictions throughout the Southern California Edison marketplace, and really bringing to the work of energy efficiency the workforce education and training elements. And we're in about 7 high schools in South and Southeast Los Angeles, and we're giving them the experience. We're working with the community colleges, LA Trade Tech, East LA Community College, and building industry recognized skill certificates as we're giving these young people experiential learning to get them excited about what this work is all about. In the summertime, just like now, even though under COVID, we've got 40 young people that are working with architecture firms and contractors and primes and other public agencies in this space. So it's an exciting opportunity, and many of them, this is about our 5th year, they're rolling up into bachelor's. They're graduating. They're graduating with enthusiasm. They're moving into academic programs, BAs in environmental sciences and environmental engineering at UC Berkeley and other places. So we're working on building that pipeline, because part of the challenge that we're going to face is that there's the aging workforce. Folks like me, we're going to quit in a minute, right? And we're making sure that as we leave, that there are people who are able and capable and competent to take over. And then we're also building the capacity of small minority women and veteran-owned contractors who are currently in business to understand what green building technologies are all about in the green building space. I cannot tell you how much of a deficit that we have in that arena. And this is where, the income and wealth gap will continue to grow. When I say the greener we get, the more, in fact, we will create income and wealth inequalities, if in fact we don't make investments in making sure these contractors, particularly these community contractors that are in low-income communities, are not clear about what Title 24 is and what those new building codes mean for renovating my kitchen or putting on my roof or changing out my water heater. We will not have the housing stock in our communities up to code, much less addressing the public health challenges of our communities, unless our contractors are trained about these new realities, these new standards. Just being able to, so we developed a comprehensive program that we're institutionalizing around the country called High Road Accelerated Business Institute, which the acronym means Harambee, which in Swahili means pulling together, where one platform is just making them know about this, how their work as an electrician, what it has to do with information, what it has to do with climate change, as a HVAC contractor, what that has to do with asthma, making those connections for them and giving them case studies and examples of contractors that are doing this work in other spaces. We actually do with our eContractor Academy capacity building. We train them. It used to be in person. Now we're trying to go online about green building technologies and how to pre-qualify for different project delivery with methods, whether there's pre-qualifying for LA County energy projects or JOCs or other kinds of project methods. We're building networks and trying to connect with organizations and individuals like you guys. So if there's a project, we can be a broker between our contractors and your opportunities. Business services, where centralizing everything from all of the paperwork that has to be done to providing group purchasing to minimize or lower the cost of more expensive building materials, and then ultimately getting our contractors connected to skilled workers. This is what we're doing. I had a video. Unfortunately, I don't think I could, I don't think it will show up for you. But the bottom line is we have an opportunity to, we have an opportunity to be at the forefront of a justice-centered green building economy. We've got the challenges of fixing all the things that our industry, not we as individuals, but our industry has presented us. But we also have an opportunity to work together and think in a forward way how we can make America a place worth living in, and Los Angeles. So that's my story, folks. you know, and I'm going to stick to it.
Thank you very much, Denise. Thank you for the time this morning. And I couldn't agree with you more. You know, we are at an incredible opportunity in this moment, especially with so much change, for us to push things in and hopefully a more positive direction.
Great. And I do believe our director, Wendy Angel, is in your expo area. So if you guys want to go run through and see what we're doing and become a part of our Emerald Cities family, we'd love to have you.
Thank you, Denise, and thank you for plugging our expo hall, which can be accessed in your lower left-hand corner right here. If you look on your screen and just click exhibitors, you can find our partners there. Want to let people know that some of our other sessions have started. You may have just missed our Power Stretch yoga session, but the Climate Action Planning Workshop is in full swing for cities and communities in our region. We also have a city session coming up on resilience opportunities through LEAD for cities in the wake of COVID-19. We have a building session coming up on the roadmap to a net zero carbon building. And then lastly, we have a community session that's starting right now on building a compassionate community, empathy as a core principle of design practice. Thank you again for your time this morning, Denise, and I hope folks will stick around for some more of our content today.
Sorry it took so long. Okay.
It's okay. It was all good. It was all good. We're going to record all these, and so we'll be pushing them out in the coming weeks.
All right. Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Denise. Have a good day.